we did the research about the remote work. So Six Nomads is a tool focused on distributed teams only. What we do, we attract talent, score the talent, and then match the talent with the distributed companies. And for us, it was a question. It was internal question: where do software companies hire remotely? Which countries do they choose? Do they work synchronously or asynchronously? Do they hire only in the US or do they hire globally? So we decided to do the research. We did that research with a company called AI Superiority, a data science company from Germany. And I want just to share the results of the research. I believe it would be valuable to you. We will publish the PDF of that research, and that is just some findings points, and I want to share first with you, and with your comments maybe improve it. So basically, that's the plan. That's the introduction. The first it would be introduction, then some findings, and then we will answer where established remote companies hire engineers country by country, region by region. But first, I want to talk a little bit. Job already covered that, but I want to talk about it. Why hire globally? So on that slide, you can see the evaluation of some of the remote-friendly companies. And we mentioned with the job that venture capital firms don't like to acquire companies who are remote only and who are remote. But you can see here that Red Hat and GitHub were sold, and it was successful because it is a successful company. And you can see on that screenshot other examples. You can see that Automattic is worth $3 billion. GitLab is almost $3 billion. So it answers the questions that you can still build a successful company totally remotely. But for the employer's part, why hire remotely? As Job mentioned, there are a lot of problems when you hire remotely. It's not so easy to manage the people. The answer is actually very easy. So when you hire remotely, there are no compromises at all. You can find the best talent globally. You are fishing not in a small pond just around you, but you are fishing globally. So, and you are not competing with the companies like Google or Facebook or even local companies. I'm in Russia, Moscow right now, and here we have some like local giants, Yandex, which calls the Russian Google, and the database of that company is really huge, and it's extremely difficult in Moscow to hire someone because Yandex or Mail or another local company already did it, or Google, because we have Google here as well. But when you hire globally, you can hire the best talent and without any compromises. By compromises, I mean sometimes when you hire someone to the office, you are saying, yes, okay, I will hire that person because he is the best of 5th applicants. No, it doesn't work like that on remote. You have to pick the really best person to the job. The second reason is an economic reason. Nobody is talking about that much, because saying that we want to pay equally to, for example, to US-based employees, and for example, for Ukrainian-based employees or Russian-based employees or Vietnam or Brazil-based employees. But you have to understand that it doesn't make any sense, because for the company who hire remotely, it's a way to find the best people possible for the money they can afford. So no one will pay you if you are, no, it's not a good word. Most of the companies will not pay you a US salary if you are in Russia or Ukraine, because it doesn't make any sense. So most of the companies, it's not correct as well. So a lot of companies starting to hire remotely because of the economic reasons, because it's easier to find the employee and it costs less. The third reason is scaling. It's what Job talked about. So when you need to scale when you need to double your size of the company from X to 2X and from 2X to 4X, remote is the best thing to do, because I had a conversation while I was in the US with a company called Brax. It's a really nice startup. They've got a lot of investment, but for them, it's extremely difficult to hire engineers in the US, because if they want to scale up rapidly, they have to compete with the companies around them, like Google and Facebook. But when you do that remote, scaling is quite easy. And there is a new trend. Some companies hire remotely because of the productivity reason. So they just want to work 24/7. So what does it mean? For example, the founders or some part of the team is in the US, the second part of the team is in India, for example, and the third part is in Europe. And you just get the work 24 hours. But it's a tricky, it's not so easy to accomplish, because you need to have like independent teams in every country. So it's more like a distributed company than a remote company, but you can do that as well as an employer. And before I will show you the results of the research. It's for us, it was interesting to figure out where the best software developers are. It's actually a really complicated question, and there is no answer to that question. But most of the companies believe that the best software engineers are in the same exact country where they are. So American companies believe that the best software engineers are in the US. Chinese companies believe that the best software engineers are in China. So we decided to look at the engineers contests and Olympiads, and to figure out how actually the table looks like. So on the first site, the first one is the Google Code Jam results. And you can see here that on the first place, it's Belarus. It's actually super interesting. And if you Google it, you will see that the same guy from Belarus won that contest 7 times in a row. 7 times in a row, the one guy did it. The second is China. But speaking about the remote, the Chinese market is super mature, and there is a lot of internal demand for the Chinese developers. So not a lot of Chinese developers work remotely. You will see that later. Russia, Poland, Japan, Argentina, Sweden, and only then USA. We can look at another contest. It's International Olympiad in Informatics. It's slightly different because International Olympiad is the contest between the students. And you can see here that on the first place is China, then Russia, then United States, and South Korea, and Poland. And HackerRank leaderboard. You can see that guy from Belarus, Gennady, he is on the top of Google Code Jam and HackerRank leaderboard. For those who don't know, HackerRank is a platform for algorithmic exercise, and they just do the competitions from time to time. Then Japan, then Ukraine, Russia, China, And now we have seen the leaderboards and the information about the Olympiads. And now let's see where actually remote companies hire software engineers. So what we did, we just took the list of established remote companies. You can find that list by yourself. Go into just Google it, established remote companies space GitHub, and you will see the list of 200 or I believe 200 companies. Here's just the screenshot. And we scraped the LinkedIn data from that companies and tried to answer the question, where do they actually hire? So we analyzed almost 10,000 software engineers profiles. And based on that, data, we find out that 76% of the founders of the companies from the remote list, from the established remote companies list, they live in the US. Non-use here because most of the startups were built in the US and only 24% of remote companies are not from the US. The second finding which shocked us because almost all established remote companies work asynchronously. You can see that Job mentioned that it's better to hire someone in 4 hours time difference, but you will see that most of the established remote companies have employees from all over the world. And 45% of software engineers are not from the US, but you can understand that 45% of remote workforce, 45% of the remote workforce is from the US. What's interesting, only 3 companies from the list hire just outside the US, don't hire outside the US. It's Trello, Jackson River, it's an outsourcing company, and the company called Olark. Other companies hire like globally. But it's a bit of trick here because you on the screen you can see DigitalOcean engineering recruitment chart. You can see that most of the employees are from the US and Canada, and really small percentages from India, United Kingdom, Mexico, Germany, Pakistan. So yes, only 3 companies hire just in the US, but there are some companies which hire mostly in the US, like DigitalOcean. So to answer the question, where do established remote companies hire? First, it's United States, it's 45%. The second country is India. The third country is United Kingdom. The fourth country is Brazil, Canada, France, Ukraine, Australia. So we can see the same chart here, but without the United States. And we decided to understand how much do remote workers earn at that countries, from that countries who work remotely for international companies and for remote companies. And we figured out that remote workers earn more than the physical commuters counterparts. It means that people who work in the office in the same country. You can see here, so you can see the table here. And on the left side of the table, you can see the data from pay scale and salary expert and estimated salary by that resources. And you can see also GitLab compensation calculator. So you can see here the difference that for the US, for example, it's almost the same salaries. If you go to India, you can see that according to the GitLab, it's 4 times difference. United Kingdom is almost the same, but for Brazil, it's 2 times difference as well. And we checked the job boards as well and understood that when you try to hire someone remotely, you have to understand that that person, you as a remote company, and that person as a remote employee, have a lot of possibilities, quite a lot of possibilities around the world, in their own country and globally. Because I believe if you hire remotely, you want to hire someone who speaks English fluently. So if you hire a one person who speaks English fluently, you have to pay more. And as it is here, if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. So if you want to pay like $10,000 a year and hire someone in India, so you will get unskilled, like in a 90% probability, you will get unskilled and professional software developer. But if you understand that the person can get more, and you can see that GitLab proposed to pay more than the salary in the country, it could be the best in class person. So what do we figure out? So the salary for for example, so for software engineer hired remotely, if we talk about middle software engineer, no matter where do the person lives, almost doesn't matter. Should be around $6,000 per year plus minus $10,000. So for that money, you will find the person who is good enough with the fluent English, and you can hire that as from developing countries as from developed countries. And now we're going to region by region analysis. So when you want to hire globally, there are several factors should be considered. The first, time zone. Yeah, it's great to hire someone in the same time zone or at least plus minus 4 hours time difference, but it's not the requirement. Salary. Maturity of the local IT market. What does it mean? When the local market is not really mature, it's difficult to find skilled enough person who, if you are doing like complicated product, it's quite difficult to find the person from the local market who have the relevant experience. That's why maturity of the local IT market is quite the factor. English knowledge for sure, and the number of software developers in the country. You have to know the pool, is it the big pond or is it the small pond? And we will start with India and Bangladesh because India was on the first place at the previous chart. So you remember that most of the companies who hire remotely hire in India. You can see here the same salary results here, like $10,000 middle, $30,000 senior software developer, and GitLab proposed to pay $40,000. We can say that India is a good country in terms of English level because almost everyone speaks English. The English level is moderate, but maturity of the internal IT market is not really high because there are some companies like Flipkart who are really who are present globally, but there is a huge workforce in India. You can see here that it's almost 2 million people, 2 million software developers in India. And according to, sorry, I will check. According to IDC, Indian developers population will overtake the US population by 2023. But in terms of time zone, it's not so easy if you're in the US or you are in the Europe to work with the software developers from India, because it's quite a big difference. It's, as I remember right, it's 13 hours difference with the San Francisco US and a quite big difference with Europe. So if you want to work with India, you have to work async. Companies hiring in India. So maybe you know DuckDuckGo, it's a browser, alternative browser to Internet Explorer, Chrome, and Safari. They hire in India. Dribble, amazing company, hires in India as well. Crossover, it's really huge outsourcing companies they hire in India. And GitHub is hiring in India as well. So GitHub is a big enough company to hire in India. And I believe not only because of the economic reasons, but because it's a great talent pool, so you can just find the right person for the company in that country. According that chart, it's a screenshot from the Stack Overflow report, but you can see here that a lot of software developers in India, you can see it on the left right corner, searching for the job right now. But according to the Stack Overflow, most of the developers in India and Bangladesh don't have a lot of software development experience. So you can see that people who are searching for the jobs, they have just from 2 to 3 years professional experience in software development. So pros and cons hiring in India. It's really cost effective. It's a super big developer hub, but unfortunately, most of the developers don't have a lot of experience, and you have to be ready for that. It's still okay. It's just okay to hire in India, but you have to be prepared that you have to spend a lot of time on a vetting process. And for synchronous operations, there is a big difference between the US and between the Europe, but for the economic reasons, it's a good country to be. And in terms of developer workforce, it's for sure a good country to be. But the second is the Western Europe. Do you remember there was a chart with Great Britain, UK, with the UK, France, and other countries? Let's look at those countries. So if we talk about the United Kingdom, the competition for software developers in the United Kingdom is super intense. And it's extremely difficult to hire someone in the United Kingdom. For Germany, it's almost the same. It's a highly matured internal market, and it's quite difficult to hire someone in Germany. But there are two countries, Spain and France, and you can see even here that there is a huge salary difference between those countries, and not really matured internal markets. I would say that you can see on the chart that the maturity is quite low, is low. But you can see here that the salaries in Spain and France are lower than Germany and the United Kingdom. And if you hire remotely, it's easier to find software developers from Spain and France than from Germany and the United Kingdom. A lot of companies hire in Western Europe. You can see here quite a lot of companies, but just Europeans hire in Europe. What do we mean? So, sorry. What do we mean? So, we have analyzed all companies who hire in Europe and find out that only three only three companies with the US founders from the list hire in Europe, but all other companies, founders of that companies have European roots. So they could be in the US right now, but originally they're from Europe and some of the European countries. So if you see the chart, you can understand that most of the companies who have European roots or operates or live in Europe hire in Europe. Otherwise, US companies with the with the founders from the US don't hire in Europe. Sorry. Why good to hire in Europe? Because of cultural proximity. When you hire in the UK, it's the same language. It's easy to communicate. And you can see the second point is that developers from the UK, Ireland, and Europe tend to have started coding earlier than others than elsewhere in the world. So basically, you can hire someone who are quite young, but the person will have more than 3 years of experience already. And if you're in Europe, it's a great place to be, but not for economic reasons. If you want to hire someone in Europe due to economic reasons, it's not the right choice. But if you want to hire someone in Spain or France, it still be cheaper than to hire in the UK or in Germany, especially if you're in the US. And the fifth point, it's not so easy to find someone because it's super competitive market, especially in Germany and UK. The third, Brazil and Argentina. If you're in the US, it's a great countries to hire someone because the countries are in the same time zone, almost in the same time zone with the US. And due to the economic reasons, it's really nice place to hire someone because it's quite cheaper. It's cheaper than to hire in the US. You can see the workforce is not so big as in India, but you can still see that it's almost 100,000 engineers in Brazil. The only problem is that I see. I don't have any experience hiring in Brazil, but the only problem I see is quite low English level. But that's it. And the second point, it's the internal market. It's not really matured, so it's difficult to find someone who is expert in something already. You can see the same chart as for India. You can see that there are not a lot of people who are searching for a job in Brazil and Argentina, but they have a lot more years of experience than in India. You can see here Brazil, as average in Brazil, they have from 5.5 to 6, and in Argentina's average experience is more than 6 years. It's still cost effective, higher in Argentina and Brazil, and similar time zone with the US. Low maturity of the local IT market, it means there is not a lot of competition. But the problem is that overall it's a low level, low English knowledge. Eastern Europe. It was a shock to us because we're from Eastern Europe, that a lot of companies hire from Eastern Europe, and most of the companies have employees of the Eastern Europe. For example, it's Doist. You know, it's a Doist app. It's an app for time management and for tasks. And you can see that they people hire in Russia, Portugal, France, Australia, Poland. So mostly from the Eastern and Western Europe. As I mentioned above, Europeans companies hire in Europe. When we say Eastern Europe, we say about the countries like Russia, Ukraine, Poland, Serbia. It's interesting. I believe you captured that on a chart that in Ukraine, there are more developers who work remotely than in Russia. It's interesting, and we decided to figure out why. And the only reason we see that internal market, it's not so developed as in Russia. In Russia, there are a lot of solid players like Yandex, Mail, Avito, VK, who hire internally, and in Ukraine, there are not a lot of companies. There are a lot of famous companies who become international, like GitLab, like Grammarly, and others. But in terms of internal markets, there is no so demand in Ukraine internally. That's why people work globally. Poland is a relatively, in terms of workforce, you can see that the number of software developers in Poland, it's almost the same as in Russia and the Ukraine. So if you want to hire someone in Eastern Europe, Ukraine, Russia, Poland, it's a great countries to hire. You can always hire in Serbia as well, but you can see that the developer workforce in Serbia is not too high. Why to hire in Eastern Europe? It's cultural proximity as a question. So sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not. A big developer hub for sure, strong engineers due to Soviet education standards, and there are still strong med school and really cost effective. But for synchronous communication, if you are in the US or Canada, it's quite complicated to hire in those countries because it's quite a big time difference. It's the end of the analysis here, and I want to share a few words about what 6 Nomads do and why we're doing that conference and why we're doing that research. So 6 Nomads is a hiring tool made exclusively for distributed teams, and our goal is to attract talent globally, really globally. We don't care about the country, we don't care about the religion. We only care about the skills and about the fluent English. So what we did, we have built an automated scoring system at 6 Nomads, and what we do, we attract candidates, and all the candidates went through the 3 stages of assessment. So first they do like testing, then they do algorithm exercise, and the final stage they do video interview. So our goal is to be the biggest marketplace for the remote workforce. We believe that many panelists mentioned that when you're remote and when you publish the vacancy, you get a lot of applicants. We believe that there is no need to have a lot of applicants. It's much better to have like the best applicants than a lot of. If you get like 1,000 or more requests, it's super complicated to deal with them because you have to interview and you have to figure out by your own who is strong, who is not. For us, it's a goal like to show the best candidates from all over the world to the remote companies.